Hello, everyone. Welcome to another stream of Art Lounge, where I will be sharing ways you guys can improve your drawing. So, since there was a break over the weekend, and hopefully those of you who are watching are actually also practicing and drawing and trying to get better at drawing as well. And for those viewers, I would like to do just a quick review of some of the most important things that we've learned so far. It's always nice to refresh your memory. And I like to go back to this page just because it's pretty much the foundation for figure drawing. There are so many different principles here that simplify things and make it a lot easier in general that I feel like it's good to review. And in the future, I'm going to be giving you guys access to these pages, so you could work from them. You can do what you want with them, print them, put them on your screen, whatever. That should be sometime soon. I was thinking of holding off for a while, but I don't really see any reason to at this point. So yeah, stick around. I'm going to update you guys on that as well. I'll be posting stuff on Twitter. So make sure you check out that social media platform. I don't know if I'm going to be really putting out so much text info on the other ones, but eventually I just would like to funnel all text-based updates onto Twitter. And we'll see. It really depends on that platform and where it goes. If it's going to go towards corruption or not, in which case I'm not going to support it. But until then, my goal is to push things towards Twitter for text updates. All right, so with that said, let's just jump into it, right? We're gonna talk about unit of measurements, right? We talked about it last week. The most important part when you are starting out drawing is the head, right? You start out with the head. Pretty simple. Start out with the circle, right? And when we talked about this, like the very first episode, how important it is to practice this. Get yourself a little pad like this. I talk about it very often. Something small like that. Practice your basic shapes. Practice shading, which I'll go over real quick. It's easy. It's flexible. You can put it in your pocket. It's pretty small. You can put it into any size bag. And just draw whenever there's free time. If you're like on public transportation, if you have like a lunch break or some sort and just want to kill some time, or if you want to improve your work, perfect opportunity to do so. So you could practice drawing the circle well, because it is the most important part. It is your unit of measurement for everything else in the body, as you're about to see. So once you get down the circle right, perfectly right, you add the cub shape at the bottom for the chin. Then you want to split it down the middle to make sure that both halves are, that you're producing the right proportions on both halves. And any other part of the face as well. It just helps to make sure everything's in line. You don't want one eye to be lower or higher than the other one, even by the slightest bit, because that's just going to make your drawing look weird. And that's just like how it is when it comes to figure drawing. Every tiny bit of detail counts to make sure that the drawing comes out right. And like I was showing before, Picasso started out doing really realistic work, and then he ventured into doing things that are that he played around with. He played around with perspective, he played around with the facial features. He created something unique, or his own style or his own voice from learning these foundations, from learning the figure and anatomy and proportion and all that stuff. It is just it enriches your ability. It enriches your visual library. It enriches your hand-eye coordination and your hand being able to make all sorts of interesting different lines, as opposed to like really jagged ones. And you can always tell by looking at somebody's work when someone draws a lot and when somebody really doesn't. It wants to take a shortcut and start drawing like amazing stuff. So anyways, yeah, the idea of proportion, the idea of anatomy, it's all a really important foundation. So when you start out with drawing the head, as you could see, it's really important to make sure you draw it the same when you are measuring, that is. So as you can see, the torso is 2 heads wide, including the shoulders. It's 3 heads wide, 2 heads for the height of the body. The foot size, and this is also an important detail. You see some work and the feet are huge, and it's sometimes kind of hard to tell if the illustrator did it intentionally or just is overlooking the proportion. Same thing for the hands. You don't want them to be too big or really small. As you can see, the hand is about 3/4 the size of the head. The foot is about the same size as the head, with the toes kind of extending a little further past the top of the head. So you can always check that. You know, when you're looking at your drawing, you get down to the feet and you start drawing them. You could be like, well, let me eye it. Let me just use either the pencil if your ruler is not around. This really cheap but great tool that I use very frequently because it is transparent, because it's small enough to fit in any direction on a page. Yeah, you could use that and you could be like, all right, well, how big is the foot actually? It's supposed to be about the same size as the head, so it shouldn't be any shorter or it shouldn't be any longer. And you could just see and compare and just like measure it. That's if it is a straight on shot, which as a beginner, I'm sure you'll be doing lots of those before you jump into like foreshortening and perspective and all that. So until that point, you know, this really does help a lot. You could just use that to make sure that everything looks right. Then we go for the foot, or the leg rather. It's 2 heads going down towards the knee, from right about where the groin area is, and you could see that it's angled. You know, this is just to show that this is how it would fit into the hip area. You don't want to draw it without this part. It's very important. It's also part of the anatomy, and we'll get into this today, actually, just talking about the ball and socket concept, and you'll see how that plays in. Same thing with the shoulders as well. So 2 heads going down towards the knee. Sometimes it's about like a head if you're drawing like the 7-head figure. So the top of the foot, or the top of the leg rather, is from the groin to the knee about like a head, maybe just a little bit more, maybe a head and a half for the 7-head figure. But for the 8-head figure, the top part of the leg from the groin area down to the knee is 2 heads in length and 1 head in width, both for the 7 and 8-head figure. And the bottom part of the leg, it's pretty simple. You know, you have to make sure that you follow this pattern of tapering it down towards the knee. You can see how it's pretty wide at the top of the leg. Tapers down more so towards the knee. And then from the knee down to the halfway point of the foot, it is half a head. But it's kind of easy to just follow from the top part of the leg from there, you know, to make sure that it's right. You don't have to like, okay, is it really like 3/4 the size of the head? Let me compare 3/4 the size of this head to this. Yep, okay, you don't really... If you're a perfectionist, which is great, especially if you're learning, go for it, do it. But you can also just follow the length of and the width of the top part of the foot. And so as you can see, it's the same idea here. You got 2 heads all the way down to the middle part of the foot for the length of the bottom part of the foot. Then I don't really want to fold it. Then we got to even simplify it even more so, once you do draw out the top part of the body, it is 4 heads. And that's both for the 7-head figure and the 8-head figure. You got 2 heads from the chin, 1 head, and then from the chin down to the chest, that's 2 heads. Then from the chest down to let's say maybe halfway towards the waist, that's another head, and then from the waist down to the groin area is another head. So 4 heads altogether for the upper part of the body. Now, pay attention to this. This is really important. This is something that a lot of people who are starting out make this mistake, and even people who are intermediate or so, they don't draw the tip of the hands, or the fingers rather, past the groin area. They just kind of do it there, or it's just barely going past it. Notice that the hands go well past the groin area, especially if you're doing a pretty a flat perspective. You're not doing any angles, you're not doing any foreshortening. It's important to remember. And just in general, you want to look out for that as well. And we'll talk about how people even make that mistake of making it too long sometimes when they're foreshortening the gesture of the figure. And that's a little bit further on. So as we talked about here, it's 2 heads for the top part of the leg, 2 heads going down towards the middle, and then half the head for the wrist, and 1.5 heads for the waist, with 1 head being the height for the hip area and for the forearm. So that's just kind of quick review there. You guys can always check out the previous streams as well, where I do that quick review, maybe a little bit slower. But I did want to just, going to the gym, do some stretches. This is the stretch that you're just waking up your mind, waking up your hand. Well, more so your mind, and getting your hand ready for all these things to keep in mind for drawing the figure. Then we also did this. We were talking about that. This is something that's really good for the sketchbook that I mentioned earlier. Practicing your shading from highlight, midtone to shadows. And this is important too. Write this down in your sketchbook so that you don't have to remember each and every time, what was it? What were the 3? And you could remember these terms so you could use them correctly when, if you're talking to your friends about drawing or things that you're working on and so on and so forth. You want to use the right terms for it. So highlights, midtones, and shadows. And just practice that. It's fun. It's kind of mindless, right? The only thing you have to keep in mind is keep it light enough to start out the highlights, and then try to press harder gradually. Not too hard, but try to make it as much of a smooth transition from light highlights to midtones to shadows as possible. That's the goal of the exercise. To gain more control over the pencil, gain more control over your hand-eye coordination, and your mind sending messages to your hand. Keep it light. Do the midtones, but make it so that it transitions smoother. Press a little bit harder for the shadows. That whole process. You want it to become more and more seamless and better. And plus it's also good stretch, right? It's you're doing your stretches there. And you could also practice it on basic shapes. Talked about picking a light source, whether it's the top left, top right, and it's good to change them just so that you can understand. You don't become fixated too much on one way and draw every single figure, every single character with the same light source. You will want to switch things up. It's important, for the viewers, not just for yourself, to make it more interesting. not everybody who's going to look at your work is going to be an artist. They're just people who really enjoy comics, for example, or just art in general, and they're pursuing other things. So to make it more interesting for them, you want to vary your art. You want to vary your perspectives, your light sources, and switch things up. Add some spontaneity to it. So here, you could see how, again, it's highlights, midtones, and shadows. And the further it curves away, the less light it gets, so the darker it's going to get towards the bottom. Then we talked about these shapes here, how pretty much every single part of the body is comprised of the cylinder shape. It just simplifies things. It makes it less intimidating. You're not drawing every single muscle hoping that you're going to get the leg right. You're starting out with the beams of the structure, right? The blueprint, the foundation, before you lay on the bricks, before you get into really nitty-gritty details. You want to make it as simplified as possible. And then from there, as you could see, you could start adding the muscles here, adding more muscle there, and then it just becomes easier because you've already done the proportion part of the drawing, and now you're taking it to the next step of adding more detail, as opposed to tackling both at the same time, especially when you're just trying to learn. It could be overwhelming, it could be intimidating, it could be frustrating, and you want to lessen that. It's going to happen without a doubt. You just have to accept that's part of the process. It's like reading. When you're learning the alphabet, when you're learning sentence structure and grammar and all that stuff, the last thing you want to do is jump into a really heavy, wordy book. You want to start out with something more simple. So it's the same idea here. You don't want to jump into like heavy detail, every muscle, making sure you got the proportion right, making sure that they're not too wide. The part of the body isn't too wide or too long and stuff. So step by step, building the structure, simple forms, simple shapes, and then laying on the bricks, putting in the detail. So as you could see here, it's important to keep in mind that even though you're practicing the cylinder shape, the actual parts of the body, they taper off. You don't want to have stubs. So it starts out wide, maybe just a little bit narrow, at the tip, at the top of the leg, and then it expands a little bit more so towards the middle, and then tapers off towards the bottom or the base. And that's for both, as you can see. It's for the top part of the leg, which has the widest points, and then the bottom just follows the end of the top in terms of width, and then tapers off towards the base as well. And that's important. Like I said, you don't want to do this. You don't want to draw this as like the forearm or the top part of the leg, and then the bottom part of the leg being exactly the same. And just this simple concept, tapering things off, drastically improves your drawing. You're no longer struggling to draw the two parts of the leg. Two easy shapes, two cylinder shapes. Top of the body, right? Also just giant cup if you want to make it simple. Drawing out a giant cup. That's pretty much the torso. You just have to make sure that it's, like we were saying, two heads, to keep the proportion in place. And even the foot, you could simplify things as well. For that, we went over that as well. Over here, you could see how you could also use this shape, the cylinder shape, and do the same thing in that sketchbook of yours. Practice how to shade it, and make sure you understand it by noticing that it doesn't shade the same way, let's say, as the ball, where the darkest point is at the base and then it gets lighter towards the top. It's sideways. And you could practice that. You could get yourself a can, from some I don't know, some soup can or whatever, some metal soup can, and put it under a light. Get yourself a great light lamp, like one of those swivel lamps. That's an absolute necessity. And see to get a better understanding of the light source when it comes to that. That's artificial light, but at the same time, it just helps you see how shadows form around an object when it's presented towards light. And it's just the same idea, same principle when it comes to natural light. It's just a little bit, the shadowing and the light source is more subtle. It's not as stark of a difference. This is more like dramatic light example to illustrate just how it bevels, how it turns, how it takes the light. All right, so that was pretty much it. We did range of motion, which you guys can review in a previous stream. It's just a quick idea of understanding where the limits are in position if the body is straight. You get a better understanding, and all this helps you just have a better visual aid. You're basically creating in your mind a figure, one of those mannequins, and I'll show you guys real quick. Not causing too much chaos, but something like this. This is what you're kind of trying to build in your head, so you don't have to reference an actual one. But yeah, just you're trying to create this as your reference in your mind's eye. And the more you understand it, the better it is for you and easier it is for you to draw from imagination. So all this stuff, all these, even range of motions and stuff, they're all pretty true to life. As I mentioned in the previous stream, you can test these out yourself. Stand straight, just as the figures are, and see what the range of motion is for all the different parts of the body. At some point, it's just, you just won't be able to do it if you stick to it. Like, don't bend forward, don't bend back, just stay completely straight and lift your leg and see how far back you could get that. Can you touch your butt with the heel without any assistance from the hand? Most likely not. Same thing for the arms here. If your palms are facing down and you lift your arm all the way up, you won't be able to touch the other arm, like backhand to backhand. It's not going to work. And that's just something that we're going to talk about now, which is the whole ball and socket concept. And how there is a limit depending on the rotation of your arm, the rotation of your leg and foot. At what points can they turn? And these are kind of obvious, right? Like, you think about it, you're like, yeah, it's so obvious. This is, the wrist area, that's one of the sockets there. You could see it on yourself, but it's another thing when it comes to drawing. It's something that people don't really pay attention to or keep in mind, and focus more so on trying to remember really what it was when I was first learning. I'd say it's just focusing on trying to get the result. If it's a reference, just make sure that it looks exactly the same without really thinking about the body parts as well. Like, does it really make sense to draw that? And in order for it to make sense, you have to kind of highlight these things for yourself. You have to actually draw them yourself so that you could internalize it even better in your mind's eye in this in this figure that you are creating in your head. You know, you're little by little, you understood the concept of using the head as the measurement and how that plays into the figure. And then you understood the range of motion for each one of them. And that sort of thing. So even in this example, being able to touch backhand to backhand isn't going to work, especially if the arm is straight. And I think it's helpful, you know, you look at this, the more you visualize it, the more you look at it, the more you study it, the easier and easier it becomes to draw the figure in proportion. So yeah, practice, right? That really, it makes it easier. So right, let's move on to the ball and socket concept here. So the very first thing, when you sit down to draw, the very first thing that you have to keep in mind, besides everything that we just talked about, let's just say you're very new to drawing. The first thing and the best habit you can teach yourself as you're drawing is to keep it light. You know, that is the most crucial habit that you want to learn, good habit that you want to learn, is keeping it light. For me, it took some time to actually do that. You know, I didn't keep that in mind when I was drawing. I was more focused on trying to get the result that I wanted to get. You know, if I picture something in my head, I was like so fixated on getting it out that I just didn't keep in mind this idea, like, hey, I want to make sure I have this good habit so that I'm not fighting it off later. And that's what happened. You know, I drew and I kept drawing and I didn't pay attention to it. And when the time came, I realized like how much time I'm wasting and how frustrating it gets when the lines are really ingrained and I want to erase it, I want to fix something, but I can't, you know, because it's still there despite erasing it because I pressed so hard on it. And that just makes things confusing sometimes when you have so many lines going around. You want to ease the burden, you don't want to add to it. So it's a very important habit to learn. Keeping it light when you're starting out. So I started again with the head, right? Light sketch of the head. And as you could see, the first ball and socket area is the shoulder and the neck. Those two are like the very first part. Just to do a little demonstration. It's kind of like the doll that I was showing you guys earlier. That's how it's kept together. It is a ball and socket, and it's very much like, you know, it is here in this demonstration that I'm about to finish. There's a ball that's placed inside the arm to make sure it stays in place, and the other one is inside. The other one is inside the torso to connect them and to give range of motion. So when you're drawing from your imagination, you can remember that and you can be like, does it make sense? Does this, the way that the arm is twisting or it's in position, is it really uncomfortable? And that's actually another really important point. is the position comfortable? Is it interesting? Some people are drawing certain things, and if you were to actually demonstrate it yourself, or if you were to actually try that pose yourself, it just seems awkward, or it would seem really off balance, like you're about to tilt over. So that's really important to keep in mind. It's like, is the pose, like, you could exaggerate the pose eventually, right? You could make it even more dramatic, for example, but in terms of balance, is it tilting? Does like the entire figure look like it's about to topple over? Like that, I don't think is appropriate if it's not in the context. If the character is supposed to fall over because of the action of something else, then sure. But if you're trying to create like an action pose where they're doing something, but the hand is just off, or the foot is just twisted out more, as opposed to it really being part of the flowing motion. If, let's say, he is jumping to hold on to like a rope, and his foot is like pushing off the concrete. You want to make sure that his foot actually conveys that it's not flat, or whatnot. And that just, it adds to, and this is something I mentioned before, breaking the fourth wall, right? As a viewer, you want to be, I think it's fourth wall. As a viewer, you want to feel as if that you're part of the scene, you're part of the action, you're feeling what the characters are feeling and the emotion or excitement that they're feeling. So you don't want to break that by having these like weird or uncomfortable poses when the scene calls for something otherwise. I'm gonna quickly do these, and then I'll hop back to talking about it more. If you guys got any questions, I'm looking forward to them. I want to hear what you guys think, what you're individually, not as a group, not in terms of like who's faster, who's better, or whatever. It doesn't belong here. This is all a learning process. Everybody has their own journey. So you as an individual, ask away. What are things that you want to know more about? What are things that you're kind of struggling to understand better, or things that I've explained that might not seem clear to you? I'd be glad to discuss it more, or try to put it in a different perspective to make it easier for you to understand. So the entire point of the stream is to help each and every one of you get better and improve your drawing skills. Make the process more fun. I could draw better examples explaining some of the things that I'm talking about. Just need to know what exactly it is to each and every one of you. And with the amount of time, I'll do my best to try and explain it. Now I'm not happy with this arm. It doesn't really seem that off, but for the sake of just training the hand-eye coordination, seeing the angle right. And I do enjoy finding different ways of explaining or showing things, because I feel like there's so many different ways, and if I could come up with more ways, it just demonstrates how many different avenues there are in learning something. And that's really cool. I think that's it's awesome, and that's part of the beauty in art. It just shows how things are individualistic, and there are very unique ways in gaining understanding and knowledge, which is essentially what it's about. It's not so much about it being a specific method and only this method. But I do think that there are just fundamentals and foundations that seem to be pretty universal. Like in terms of like using the head measurement, for example, I think that's a universal principle. It just works well for pretty much anybody that draws or tries to draw comics or tries to draw the figure. It's just a great way to make sure everything is in proportion. Some people do it differently. They get to the point where they draw everything in proportion through other means, and that's great. That's the point. It's to get to that level. Just find this to be the most time-reducing method, and it is kind of fun. I really do enjoy drawing out shapes like this. There's something that's very soothing about drawing out these cylinder shapes and drawing them in these in sections rather. It's kind of cool. It's fun to see how things kind of fit into each other in this method. It's a nice exercise. It's a nice stretch for drawing for me. And if you guys haven't checked out the other stream, there's an artist, Kim Jung-ji. I believe he's a Korean based artist. He's really well, draws really well, masterfully, in a sense. Like, he just doesn't draw any of these shapes out. It just comes so natural for him. He kind of just draws the outlines of everything and goes into detail, and everything looks proportionate. But I think it's because of practicing the anatomy so much that internal mind has this all down so well that you don't need to draw all of them out. It's just there for you, and your hand-eye coordination is so well trained as well that what you're picturing in your head, this doll and its position, and all the different parts and how they move and twist and stuff, all that is so well ingrained in your head from all the exercising that you don't even need to do it anymore. It's like that shoe tying example. You've done it so many times. You don't sit down and think about, okay, I do this, then I do that. You don't need those guidelines. You don't need those that vocal reminder. In your head, it's just this automatic thing that happens. So it's like, he's one of the artists who does that. There's plenty of other ones, I'm sure, but I do remember his ability to do it and how quickly he does it and how well it turns out to really have get stuck in my mind as an example, like where it eventually all leads to. Where does it all this practice? Whoa, this toe looks huge. That looks off. I think that perfectionist side of the project stream is coming out. Making sure every single little detail is right. So just another ball and socket example. I'm going to draw it through. This is the other thing I keep forgetting to do, which is, along with drawing lightly, not holding the pencil towards the tip. Like, I remember I used to actually be even worse about it, where I would really hold it closer towards the end. And now that I do that, it's so uncomfortable. Like, you get more range of motion, and I think it helps not to get bogged down with tiny little details, getting really rigid and stiff to make sure all that tiny little detail is right. It helps to keep your distance from the tip. So you could make these free-flowing, doing this is a lot more stiff than doing this. And you could see how much more I could cover in a sketch and how much my wrist moves if I wanted to get the same range of motion, same coverage, let's just say on paper, when my hand is like very much towards the end or the tip of the pencil. So there's a benefit to it. There's definitely a positive side to doing it. So keeping it light and keeping your distance from the tip of the pencil, I'd say, are two important good habits to teach yourself from the beginning. And constantly check in with yourself. Maybe even write it down at the top of the page. Keep it light. Keep distance. From tip if you need more direction. And then, you could flip through. Tomorrow you might forget, right? Maybe, hopefully not. But you could review your what you've done the day before, and you could switch to it, and you could be like, oh, look, it's written up here. Keep it light, keep the distance from the tip. And just kind of helps, rather than you being like, what was it? What were the principles? So as I mentioned, writing and drawing are very important. Writing is important in general. It's great. Also a wonderful art form. And has so many benefits beyond just drawing. So highly, highly recommend you getting into it as well. So this is another socket example. Just pops right in there into the hip, and it gives the leg all sorts of range of motion that we were discussing. I'm gonna do another one, this leg right here. Maybe keep it distant. This is the other ball and socket. Enabling your knee to bend. So just me talking about it is not enough. You should try to sit down and draw these out yourself. And you will see how next time you sit down and you draw from your imagination, you will pay more attention to these things because you remembered, like, oh, I practiced this. I drew these out. Like, does it make sense for it to bend more than it does on the image? And considering the range of motion, considering maintaining balance, like, does my drawing look like he's about to tip over in comparison to the reference? You know, that could be a thing, right? Like, despite your reference having the right pose, your drawing might be off because you drew the leg a little bit. Like, let's say if it was this leg, you drew it bending even more towards the back. You know, so it's like, is that realistic? If I was to stand in this pose, I probably would topple over, just, you know, face down. So yeah, just all these principles help you, like, notice what's wrong with your own drawing, despite the reference being there for you. Different tools, you know, this is what I mentioned previously as well, as you're acquiring many different tools in your tool belt to check and make sure the drawing is right. You know, you got this, you got negative space, you got the space recognition between two objects. For example, is this accurate to the reference? Let me see. How far away is this part of the leg from this one? And just compare and try to notice, like, is it really too far? Is the gap really that far? You could pay attention to the negative space, right? You got this shape externally, and you could focus on this shape. You know, it's kind of switching your vision to see something different from the anatomical parts, the anatomical limbs or whatnot. Now you're kind of going into, like, the abstract realm to ensure accuracy, to train your eye to see details, to see certain lines within the reference and your own drawing. So yeah, just kind of switch from there. It's another tool. So you just take out all these tools depending on what you want to accomplish. Maybe the hammer doesn't work. Maybe let me take out the saw. The saw didn't work, or they did, and you just need more tools to bring out to make sure you get the result that you're looking for, the accuracy that you're looking for. So negative space, paying attention to the relationship between two objects, measuring that and being like, no, it seems like it's way longer or shorter than it should be. All this stuff to help your hand-eye coordination develop, become even more accurate. Your ability to see detail, to be even more sensitive to that. All those things. So I'm gonna draw the ball here. Another ball here. Ball socket. So I think I am gonna cut it off here, guys. I want to stay close to the schedule. I don't want to go past the time that I would be starting the other stream. I'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place, for drawing figure basics with more lessons. Probably won't do another review like that. Maybe just a brief one from the previous day. I'll try to like keep the general review of all the things to like maybe every 2 days. I think it's important to keep it up. You know, you guys might watch the streams and then 2 days later watch them again. So it's nice to just refresh the memory on all these things. So like maybe every 2 days, or every other day rather, I will try to do a review with a brief overview of like the previous stream each day. So yeah, stick around, guys. It's gonna be exciting actually. The next stream, I'm gonna be introducing some new content. You might want to stick around a little bit for that. If you enjoy this content, subscribe, hit the like button, chat in social media, you know, or post some stuff in this chat. I'll see if I'll notice it, or if I'm gonna get notification about Twitch chats. Not too sure about that yet. But yeah, join other social media. I'm going to be announcing other ways you guys can connect with each other, with me in the future. But until then, you know, post your questions, post your comments, post your points of views and things that you're struggling with, what you're learning. And yeah, we could talk about that on the next stream. I could write you guys back directly. So stick around. I'll see you in 5 minutes.